Okay, I am showing 1 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and get things started. Welcome everybody to this month's webinar, the Laserfiche Build Along about advanced forms, the one you've all been waiting for, right? My name is Stephen Krutzfeldt. I'm a pre-sales engineer here with CDI. Today's going to be just slightly different. The first thing I want to do is there should be questions, chat, and then there's a handout. So today's meeting actually has a handout. A lot of what I'm going to be covering today will be showing things like JavaScript and CSS. And if you're anything like me, I'm not a programmer. So I'm going to go ahead and gift you with the JavaScript that you can go ahead and just drag and drop or copy and paste into the form to utilize some of the things we'll look at here. So this will kind of help you to follow along also. So with that out of the way, if this is your first build along, welcome. Thank you for joining. What is a build along? In short, a build along is an interactive experience designed to guide the viewer through the creation and deployment of a common business process. Meaning that by the end of this, you should be able to have something that tangible that you can actually deploy in-house based on what we look at today. If you have any questions, please post them into the chat box. I will allow time at the end of the webinar to address any questions that you may have. Tips for success. To get the most out of this, please take good notes. Personally, I recommend taking screenshots also. I'm a very visual learner, so take good screenshots. Don't be afraid to ask those questions. Complete the survey afterwards. If we're still using surveys, I don't know if we're doing that or not, but if there is no survey, feel free to reach out to me directly or to our team and let us know how we can make these webinars better, how we can improve them, any ideas or things that you'd like to see in one of these webinars. We also take into account that I'm always looking for new options and ideas. Also know that this will be recorded and individual sessions are available. Typically within, I'd say 3 to 4 days, these videos are available on our YouTube channel. So if you just visit the CDI YouTube channel or just Google Cities Digital or CDI, you should be able to find the video recording for these as well. So today's process is going to be around advanced forms. The intended audience is going to be Laserfiche administrators as well as advanced forms users. So I am making the assumption that all of you have used forms in at least some fashion. If you haven't, though, that's all right, that this will still give you a really good introduction of some of the things that can be done and give you an in-depth look into what forms can be used for, how it can be utilized, and start to give you some ideas and start those wheels turning of how you can utilize forms in your organization. We'll need access to Laserfiche Forms. We may take a look at the Laserfiche client and then also the admin console. Although really, we're mainly going to be focusing on Laserfiche Forms today. We might just touch on some of these or just discuss it, but we probably won't be doing too much in the client or the admin console. For an agenda, I'm going to begin by looking at a forms example that's utilizing a lot of the advanced field options that we can add in forms. So you can see kind of what the end product looks like first, and then we're going to reverse engineer that and see how these are actually built and how you can deploy these in your organization. So that's what we'll be talking about. We'll go back into the advanced fields and show you how they're actually configured. And then we will actually build a form using some of these at the end. With that, let's go ahead and get into it. So starting out, this is a form that I built specifically for this webinar. It's not actually doing anything, so I'm kind of using a mixed match of a lot of different fields that would be used on a lot of different forms to give you an idea of what can be done. So the first thing we're going to do is just go through some of these different options. First thing that probably pops out is there's a really pretty picture of my hometown here, Minneapolis, Minnesota. And so I wanted to point out that you can add pictures to your forms. Also links. Even here at CDI, we have an internal form that we use as a dashboard. So our users, or people within our organization, can go to a hosted form and they can use that to link to additional forms, like in order to fill out expense reports, request time off, give one another accolades. But having that ability to have that link embedded on a form can be very powerful and can be used to actually build out some of those internal dashboards. So you can start to think about that. In this case, it's just taking you to my LinkedIn page. Next thing I wanted to look at is, if you've been using forms for a while, you'll know that when you drag and drop the different fields, it stacks them kind of one on top of another. I wanted to point out that we do have the ability to format your forms and your fields side by side one another. That could be 2 in a row, 3 in a row. I wouldn't go many more than 4 though, because then it starts to take up a lot of space and get a little bit crowded. But one of the things we'll look at today is how you can use what we call inline blocks in order to display your fields side by side instead of one on top of another. We can also change the color of what is the text that's coming in here as well. So if you want to have something bolded or red, or if you want to have it highlighted, or if you want to make it blue and bold or italicized or anything like that, we can use some CSS in order to do that as well. Another thing that I see fairly often is forms can get a little bit crowded, and there may be information for like a spouse or a child, but the individual who's filling out the form doesn't necessarily have a spouse or any dependents or children or anything like that. So the ability to hide and show fields based on selection is important also. Also, by default, when a section shows up, this is going to be just kind of white. You may be able to bold or change the color of this area here, but one thing I was going to show is how you can really make that pop out by adding some color to the top bar there. Another thing that I've started using as kind of just the standard practices now is formatting the different fields like the phone number, social security numbers, and things like that. A lot of times what I'll see is a little message at the bottom that says, please format the phone number to be in parentheses, first 3 space, and that's fine, but not everybody's going to follow those rules or see that. So if you want some consistency, what you can do is add what we call a mask. So that way, no matter what you type in, it's going to automatically fill that in the correct format, and we can't add any more there. So as you can see, it'll always be formatted correctly. Another option here, making sure the emails match. As you can see that there's this email addresses do not match option here, so we can set up rules so you can't submit the form unless these match. This will make sure that the email you're getting is valid, usable, especially if you're going to be using that as the main point of contact or the main way of contacting the individual. You want to make sure that that's correct. So when it matches, then we're all good. Same thing with social security number. We're just masking it to make sure that it fits the same format as always. I'm going to select the blue pill here. As you can see, we can change the borders to be any different colors. And what I've actually done here, if you have a style guide for your organization and you want to make sure that your form is matching that correctly, I recommend getting that information, that RGB code, so that way all of your forms can use that correct blue. I'm actually using the same blue for here and here, as well as the name and the next option. And rather than trying to dig out my style guide, I cheated a little bit. That there is a color pick eyedropper that you can just download. This is a Google add-in. But if you select that, you can just hover over these, click on it, and it'll give you that number and that code. So then you can use that and make sure that everything's styled the same way. Oftentimes when I'm working with organizations in a consulting standpoint and I want to make sure that their forms are styled, I'll just visit their website, use the token selector, or sorry, the color selector, save that information, and then make sure everything matches the same style as their public-facing website. So that's a neat little trick for you. I did see that a couple of others joined while we were talking. So I'm going to go ahead and point out again that if you go to the little floating GoToWebinar window underneath polls, questions, and there's handouts. There's a handout in there with all of the different CSS and JavaScript of how to, that you can just copy and paste to make all of these different fields a reality for you. And I believe this will also be attached or available when the YouTube video is out as well. So that way YouTube viewers can download that as well. So the next thing I wanted to look at is if billing and shipping is the same, or maybe you have two different fields that you want to have filled out automatically rather than typing the same thing over and over again. What we can do is have an option that when you select it, it just copies information from one over to the other. So billing is the same as shipping, fill that out. If not, you can always go in here and fill that out manually too. So the next page I want to look at, and also multiple pages here are an option. I've seen a lot of people have one really, really long form, but we do have the ability to break it out into different sections or different pages, hide, show pages based on selections from earlier. You've got a lot of different options of making your form dynamic if you want. And also a very powerful piece is having external database lookups or external table lookups. So what I've done is I created a SQL table in the background, and I'm pointing my form to that SQL table. So I've got a couple of different selections that I can choose from here for my different vendors. And sorry about that, looks like it's just taking a minute. If we select Surly, those of you who are in the Minnesota area may recognize these. These are actually local breweries in Minneapolis. Surly Furious is an IPA. Same thing with, if we want to do Summit and Saga, my absolute favorite. My birthday's in July, if you guys want to pick something up for me. So as you can see, it's dynamic. So depending on which vendor I'm selecting, it's giving me a list, and it's automatically populating the cost based on that table lookup. Now, this is just one example, but know that oftentimes, even internally at CDI, we'll have a drop-down list of our employees, and then we can automatically populate employee number, or vice versa, type in employee number, automatically populate the email, phone number, employee name, whatever else information. And this is an example of a collection where you can add multiple rows, as many as you need. And it's always looking that up. And then we can run different formulas to tally up all the different costs in this case. So subtotal cost here, sales tax is calculating automatically at 0.05%. And that's giving us a total there as well. Now this will come in handy. I'm actually going to be using this when we submit it because dynamic routing is also a thing. A lot of you have requested information about how can I route a form to a different individual based on variables, whether that be if it's a departmental thing, if HR is submitting it, make sure it goes to this individual, making sure that if it's a time off request, it's going to the correct manager. This would be a great way to do that. Have a lookup table, so when the employee puts in their employee number, somewhere in the background, it's figuring out who their supervisor is, and then we can route that form to that supervisor. In this case, the rule that I'm going to set up is if this is over $50, then it's going to route to one person. If it's less than $50, then it's going to route to someone else. Now, the last page I have here, an example is to just show how you can have text displayed here. So if something like a disclosure or just some information they need to assign or agree to, you'll notice there's no submit button here. That's because we need to have a signature and make sure they agree. Before we do that, signature can be drawn or typed. And then when you say, I agree, we can have the submit button show up then. The other thing that I think is kind of cool, and I've had people ask this before, and I wasn't really sure if it was a possibility until this week, and I did some toying around with it, but being able to only select a date of today or in the future can be done. So you can see it's blanking out everything else before the 14th of May of 2020. And that, I'm not sure if that's included in the handout or not. If it's not, please let me know and I'll go ahead and make sure that that gets out to everyone who's interested in it, because it is a powerful option. And lastly, the attachment. Attachments are great, but sometimes we want to make sure that the attachment that's being sent is in a specific format. If it's only a PDF or maybe a Word doc, or only accept images of some kind, a TIFF or something. In this case, I'm saying attached PDF, so it has to be a PDF. And as you can see, if we open up my File Explorer, in my samples, there's a lot of different TIFFs in here, but also Word docs and PDFs. But when I go to navigate out and grab that attachment, it's only allowing PDFs. And if you want to display the image of that in a thumbnail, that is an option as well. So we go ahead and hit submit. Asked that there's two pieces of forms. There's the form itself, and then there's the routing steps, the actual process. What we just saw is an example of just the form itself. Once it's submitted, that's when the business process kicks off. Oh, right, and by the way, if you want to redirect the submitter to a website or someplace else besides just a thank you page, that's an option as well. So in this case, it just went to the CDI website. If we go back to our forms process into our inbox, we should see our submitted form come in, and it was over $50, so we should see it go down the more than $50 path, which it did. And so then our user can go in here and just go ahead and verify, approve, or deny based on that, which actually we don't need to go into right now. So that's what I would refer to as advanced forms options, advanced fields, a way to make your form dynamic and give some different options to make it more than just the drag and drop into place. So let's take a look at kind of how we did that. I'm going to go in to my form, and we'll pick this apart a little bit, and then we'll go ahead and start creating one from scratch so you can see what that process looks like. Oh, before I forget, while this loads, that CSS JavaScript formula examples, that's actually, before we can go into it, I just want to show this to you. So if we go into design, actually, we can go ahead and just open up a new window. In the business process library, I think if you if you go to designer and then go to business process library, select that, there's hundreds, not hundreds, at least dozens though, of pre-built forms and forms processes that you can select from. These are all built by people in the industry, and you can sort and filter and choose based on industry specific or by department. So if you're looking for resources or IT, etc., those are already pre-built. But the one that I really want to focus on, do I have a search option here? CSS JavaScript formula examples. This already exists in here, and it actually does a pretty good job of showing you some of the different options. So you can download that if you have forms already. That's already available to you. And I used it as a reference point when I was building my own form, and kind of gave me some ideas that I didn't think of. So that's a great resource for you. But this is my form. This is what we're looking at. And as you can see, it's relatively basic. We submit the form, and then it's depending on whether it's more than $50 or less than $50, it's going to go down one of these paths for approval. And then regardless of which path, it ultimately ends up being saved to Laserfiche. I kept this simple because I'd rather talk through it than try to show a very convoluted, complicated business process. But know that each one of these paths can have its own properties and its own rules. The condition is set here. If you just click on the path itself, you don't always need to set a rule at this level. You can set it at the path level also. But basically, you can say any one of the different fields on the form that have been submitted can have some sort of rule associated with it. So if the total is something else, if first name begins with between A and L, go down this path. And if it's M to Z, then go ahead and go down another path. So that greater than, equal to, you can use the in-between options as well. You've got a lot of different options that you can use. What I really want to focus on though is the form itself. So let's go ahead and open this up. Now the picture, how do you add a picture? That is actually just an HTML block. So if we go in here, you'll see when you open up if you were to drag and drop an HTML, custom HTML activity here, we would go in here and just say that we want to add a picture. So you can see here, if we insert picture, you can drag and drop, or you can navigate out to one that's saved locally, and it'll use that image path. So if we actually look at the HTML, we'll see it's probably much more yep. So it's actually looking for that source. So that's how we do that. Picture equals HTML. Similarly, with the link here, I don't actually want to go to the link, thank you. If we edit that, I'm having trouble clicking on it. That's fine. All you need to know is that that is also an HTML activity. If we drag that in, if we select the link, that's where we can add the hyperlink here. So it kind of hides here, just custom HTML. You may think, hey, I'm not a programmer. I don't want to start coding to try and get this done. But it's a lot easier than you think, because the visual allows you to, if you just want to add text, you just type the text in here. And if I just type hello world, it's going to automatically format it in the HTML to add those paragraphs, opening and closing tags. So it'll do a lot of the work for you here. It helps if you know a little bit of programming, but you don't have to be a developer to add any of these functions. Now you'll see that when we drag and drop things like first name and last name in here, they come in right on top of one another, just like I said. So how are we making them side by side? And it's actually a two-part system. First of all, if we edit the field itself, we go to the Advanced tab. There's something called the CSS class on the Advanced tab of the activity. And you'll see there's two here. One is set blue and bold, and the other is 2 per line. Now, simply writing these in here isn't going to do anything, but it's going to tell the CSS and JavaScript where to look for fields to apply that rule to. So by putting in 2 per line, I'm going to then go in to the CSS and JavaScript piece up here. So we're in the design, we're in the starting form, we have layout, field rules, lookup rules, CSS and JavaScript. And in the JavaScript area, that's where we go in and we add, let's see if I can find the specific one. So up here on the CSS, 2 per line. So this is saying that if 2 per line is written, then display inline block. And this is actually in that attachment that I gave you. So literally all you guys need to do is copy and paste that 2 per line area, displays 2 per line field, down to that curly bracket. And then the CSS class, for whatever fields you want to be displayed in line, 2 per line, add in the CSS class 2 per line. And if you have multiple, so if you want it 2 per line and you want it to be set in bold and blue and you want it to be something else, then you can add multiple by just separating it with a space. So that's how we do that. But most of what we've done in order to make these different fields and functions work has to do with that CSS class. Trying to think of another example here. So the checkbox, the rule to hide and show is based on a checkbox being checked. And so what I needed to do then is go into the advanced setting and give it a CSS class. And I labeled it something that I could easily reference or go back to. And so show submit checkbox is what I called it. So when that's checked, it'll hide or show the submit button. And we'll take a little bit closer look at some of these when we start to build it. But I want to go ahead and look at some of the formulas. Now, if you want to automatically calculate or total or something like that, or apply some sort of formula based on the others, the way we're going to do that is go to the field that you want to populate the number that is going to be totaled up, go in and edit that. Again, it's going to be on the Advanced tab. And in the Advanced tab, if any of you have any experience with Excel and adding formulas in Excel, it's pretty much the exact same formulas. But if you're not as familiar, what you can do is think, all right, first of all, I want to calculate the sum. So you can go to the function table and just find sum, and it'll go ahead and drop that information in for you. What it won't do, though, is know what you want the sum of. So then that's why when we use the insert variables, or what we call the token picker, the token picker will allow you to calculate the sum of multiple fields. You will need to know what that field is called. So let's go ahead and take a look at this quick. I have a table here with vendor, product, and cost. If I were to open that up and edit it, we'll see that the whole thing is called table, but we have different columns, and then each column is going to have its own information as well. So the vendor, cost, currency, all of that. And each one of those is going to have its own variable, its own field label. We can make some of them read only. We can change the delineator, the size, things like that. What we're really interested in is that variable, because that's how it's going to locate it. So if I know what my variable is, then I can go back into the subtotal, advanced, and say that I want this to be, it'll have to be in the parentheses. So select it there and choose it. You should have one called table, and then specifically which table, and it's going to be that cost. And so what this will do is then calculate the sum total of all of those. So then what I'm doing is, if we look at the sales tax, very similar. We just want to calculate 5% of the total cost, right? Well, that's a multiplying piece. So we just say equals the product of the subtotal field, which is the one that we just configured up here. So this is grabbing the sum of everything. So we're taking that number, and then the multiplication icon, basically just use that asterisk, and that'll act as the multiplier, times 0.05. And then, of course, total is just going to be the sum of those two. And so that's how we did that. So for the sake of time, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the other options. How did I create the field that automatically populate from the table? That's a big one. That's going to be a lookup rule, but there's a step that we need to do first. And so let's go ahead and look at that first. Now, if you're not familiar with SQL or creating SQL tables, you can always ask the CDI team to help you create that. But ultimately, if you have an Excel document with the table that you want to create and look up, we can use that to copy over to SQL. From there, if you're an administrator and you're in Forms as an administrator, you can go to this dropdown up here, select administration, and we have data sources over here on the left. And from data sources, we usually have a group. I call mine external tables. So these are just going to be SQL tables that I'm going to be looking up to. But data sources can be multiple external locations or information. If you have an ERP system that you're connected to, or a CRM, or something else that you want to have that look up to, you can bring in multiple different software solutions to do those queries. In this case, if we open that up, first thing it's going to have is a list of your different processes. These are your forms processes. And so which of your forms processes do you want to be able to use the external lookup tables? So in this case, I have my CDI advanced forms. That's one we're working with right now. So all I had to do was just add that process and check the one that I want to be able to enable the lookup, and like basically open up that ability to look up to that table. The other piece, of course, is going to be actually adding the table itself. So as you can see, it's looking up the Microsoft SQL Server. You have to have the server name and exactly which database you're looking at. In this case, the database is going to have multiple tables in it, and all of those tables are going to be available, and then we'll say which table specifically when we get into forms. This is just taking a little bit longer than I wanted to. So here we have the server name, multiple databases to choose from. I have one specifically for external tables. So if I expand that in my tables, you'll see I have different lookup tables that I'm using. And actually, that's not the right one. I'm sorry, it's LF external tables. So there's my different tables that I can look up to. So there's students, vendors, the office. If you've seen my other webinars, I love to use characters from the office. And so I've got a lookup table specifically for that. Now, the reason I'm showing you this is because when we actually go back into our design of our table, or sorry, our form, do a lookup to that, like with my breweries. We'll go to the form. We have to make sure that this table's this form is enabled to look up to those tables. So then we can go into our lookup rules. And the lookup rule is going to ask you, where do you want to look up information from? So in this case, we're going to go to our external tables. It's going to ask us which table specifically. This one is called brews. And then what we're doing is we're saying fill in our vendor field with data from, and it's got the different columns from that specific table. And so then you just match them up. The second rule here is saying that look up to the external table location, specifically the brews table. And when the vendor matches vendor from up here, fill in the different products with the product. And then when both of those match, give us a cost. Cost will equal price. So basically saying that when we go into the form itself, when you select Surly, it'll give us a list of just Surly brews. Once you select the brew, those two will match, and that's when it's going to give us a price. So that's how we did that. Similarly, we also have field rules. Field rules are a little different from lookup rules. Lookup rules are populating the specific data that's going to go into those fields, usually from an external source. Field rules is going to be showing and hiding fields, or in this case, sections or groups based on the criteria or based on information that was given to us earlier on in the table. So the example I use to try and keep it simple is just red pill, blue pill. You can tell I watched The Matrix recently. So when the red pill is selected, we're going to show the section red pill. So show red pill and ignore the rest when radio button red pill is selected. If we just add this, you'll be able to see we can add multiple rules, and it's all going to be based on those variables that we looked at earlier. So if we want to show maybe page 3 when maybe social security number is not empty, we would just go to the rule here and just say is not blank and save. And you can always sample the student, see if it's working by using this preview option up here, this little eyeball. So based on what we changed, we'll see there's only page 1 and 2. So we'll open this up and maybe we'll type in a social security number. And then we'll see page 3 appeared. So that's an example of how we can use some of those rules. So we've done the layout, lookup rules. Themes is another important one. Once you get things looking the way that you like them to, I would say this is more of a beginner piece rather than advanced, but I'll go ahead and show you some of these. I went ahead and saved this, so that way I always have my colors. So I can always say, just go ahead and use CDI 2020. Click on that, and it'll automatically make all of my forms look the same. But if you want to start customizing that, you can start with maybe one of the basic templates. Go into Customize. This is where you can start adding your logo. Change the background color. Oftentimes it'll use that RGB information for some of the colors. So background, you'll see I'm using that color that I used, that I found with the selector. So you can start copying and pasting that and dropping that in here with the hashtag, so you can make sure that the color is consistent across everything. But under themes and under customize is where you'd go to change the title here, and then also things like the next and back buttons and the submit buttons, and give it your own color, background, borders, and things like that. All right, so what I'd like to do now is let's go ahead and just create a new one. Let's go into design and we're just going to create a new one. We could make it a blank process. I always like to start with form submission. That's probably the most common that you want the process to kick off when a form has been submitted. And we're going to call this one webinar. Let's give it a second to think. But what I want to do is let's go ahead and use the reference that I gave you guys. So in the handouts, if you have that open, that's kind of what we're going to be looking at. Just going to pull mine up here. And the first thing we're going to do is go into starting form, and we're going to design our form, and I'm going to show you how we can start with this. So the very top one is the phone number mask. So phone number itself, it may be tempting to use a number field, but because we have those parentheses, that's going to break it because the parentheses is not a number, so it's not going to like it. So I would use the single line for phone. We're going to bring it in, and actually one thing I'm going to do also, we go up to settings here. It always defaults to left alignment, but I find the top is just a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. Maybe it's just personal preference, but I always align it so the top, so that way you see the field label on top and then the line underneath it. But the field label is going to, okay, sorry about that. It looks like I clicked out of it. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and call this phone. The variable came in as single line temporarily, but it should switch over to phone. You can always change this at any time too. I'm not going to do anything with these, but the one thing that is very important is to go into advanced, go into CSS class. We're going to call this phone. And if you're looking at the document, the Word doc there, you'll notice at the top, I went ahead and told you what the CSS class is supposed to be. It is in there in the code, but if you're not familiar with CSS or JavaScript, it can be a little bit hard to identify sometimes. So that's why I put the CSS class and what it's supposed to equal, and then what the code is going to be. So we put in phone in the CSS class, we labeled it, then we're done. I'm going to go into my theme, and I'm going to just add the 2020 theme so that way it looks nice. And then I'm going to go over to the CSS and JavaScript tab. Now in the CSS and JavaScript, this is where you're going to actually drop in the code. So in here, go ahead and copy everything all the way down to that curly bracket, except for up to the mask single line. Just drop that directly in there into the JavaScript and hit save. And then if you go to the preview, we should be able to see that it has formatted. So the phone number will automatically populate that way. Pretty slick, right? You guys build this form and like take this to the rest of your team. They'll be like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that you're so technologically savvy. And you're like, oh yeah, I've been doing this for years. So let's look at another one. So the confirm email one, this one's a little bit trickier. So let's go back to our layout. And when using email fields, make sure that you do use the email one. That way it'll look for that @ symbol and that dot. Otherwise it'll say this isn't valid. And so that's already baked in, that's built in. You don't have to do anything for that. So this one we're going to call email. I'm just going to leave all this alone, but I'm going to go to advanced and you'll see the CSS class first equals email. So we'll go into CSS class, type in email, done. And then we're going to grab a separate one. I always recommend grabbing like a separate one, not using the copy and paste option if possible, just because I have seen it break things. And I'm going to go ahead and call this one confirm email. Go to advance. The CSS class for this one is going to be confirm, I believe. And done. So then all we need to do is go into the CSS and JavaScript. We're going to copy and paste that whole section before section header color change. And we're going to give ourselves a little bit of a buffer. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit enter down to 23. And I'm just going to paste that whole thing in there and save. So it should look something like this. And then if we go in here, we should be able to just do, and when we start to type, it'll say email addresses don't match. And now they do. So that's how we do that. I'm not going to go through all of these, but maybe for the last one, let's do billing as the same as shipping, just because I think that's a really cool one. So go back to layout. This is going to have 3 different sections to it. There's the address is great because it just brings in everything that you need. So we're going to call this one billing. Go to the advanced, and the CSS class for that one is going to be billing. And then we're done. Next address, this one's going to be shipping. CSS class is shipping. And then the checkbox is the tricky part. I'm actually going to drop this in between if I can. Can I put this above you? So on the checkbox, we only want to have one. So we actually want to take out all these choices. And what we can do is just say billing. I'll do this, billing, same as shipping. Whatever you put in the choice doesn't really matter so much, but the value is what's important. Because the value is looking for yes. Like in the actual code, it's saying that if yes is checked, then copy the billing over to the shipping. Now, this doesn't necessarily have to say yes, but the value has to equal yes, and that's yes with a capital Y. So put anything in here, and then values equals yes. And then I believe, not sure if we have to do anything with the CSS class here. Just to be safe, I'm gonna go ahead and drop this in here. I don't think it's gonna matter though. Checkbox CSS. Oh, never mind. Sorry. The CSS class is checked. That's right. So in CSS class, add check. So then we're going to go over to our CSS JavaScript. We're going to copy and paste everything that's in there. Let me know if you have trouble opening this too. I can always send this to you guys. I've never tried using the handouts option before. It looks like it's good, but just let me know. This is something that's publicly available. And we're going to save that. So now, moment of truth, right? Doing this live. We'll see if this is going to work. Billing address. Billing is the same as shipping. Boom, it all came in. Isn't that great? I get excited. I don't know about you guys. I think it's pretty cool stuff. All right, now that's basically how you do all of this. And so we have multiple pages here. I think there's 7 different pages, and the ones that aren't displayed here, remember that there are more examples if we go into the design and business process library, and it's called JavaScript CSS. I don't know if I can, again, I feel like there should be a way to search here, but I'm just not seeing it. But it's called like CSS JavaScript examples. And so, oh yeah, right there. So if you download that, there's options to display code. And so you can see some of these. And I don't know why I keep going back here. I actually have this downloaded. I'll just show it to you there. Last one, then I'll start taking questions. So yeah, the CSS JavaScript formula examples, I just pulled right from the business process library. and I used most of them. I think there's a couple more that I didn't use that are certainly available. Actually, there was one kind of cool one. Go into the view. So here, the one of the things they added was the date time and end time. It'll calculate and sum up the different hours, and that's all in a collection. So if you're trying to calculate time off or something like that, and you can sum up all the different hours there. And this also has the example of the future date. That's kind of where I pulled that from as well. Know that that value field that I showed you earlier, where no matter what you put in the checkbox label, doesn't matter, but the value is important. Well, that value can be a number too, and so we can start assigning formulas. So in this case, if you select different options, it's going to start totaling up a price. So that's something else that we can look at. But all of these are done the same way. We can display the code, and you would just, well, that's showing you the formula, but the code's down here, and so you can go ahead and copy and paste that, and as long as the CSS classes match, this code works. So you just need to look for that dot before whatever it is. So in this case, the trick to finding the CSS class would be looking for that dot whatever, so dot calendar date input. And once again, if you have any questions, the CDI team is here to help, and we would love the opportunity to kind of go in and create some of these things and make them live. I've personally started working with my clients to automatically add things like the phone number masking and things like that. Some of the simple ones to just drop in, because I think it adds a lot to the form, and it doesn't take very much time at all. So with that, I don't know if I had any more slides necessarily. Oh yeah, different resources. Laserfiche Answers is a great one. In fact, you don't even need to necessarily remember that, because if you type in Google Laserfiche Forms masking phone number, the first thing that always comes up is going to be something from Laserfiche Answers. It's a very, very active user group out there. People are always posting questions and answering them. Chances are you're not the first person to have that question, so you'll be able to find it pretty quickly. Also, the Solution Exchange is another one where users have been able to share and collaborate on different projects, and oftentimes you can find forms that people are using available there. And of course, laserfiche.com/support is another good one where you can just go ahead and post your questions and get in touch with Laserfiche directly. Whew. So I know it's a lot to digest. Advanced forms isn't something that happens overnight, but I'm trying to give you guys as much information in a short period of time to make you just as dangerous as I possibly can. But with that, let's open it up for questions. Who has questions? And I have to figure out how to open this up so it's a little easier to see. Just one second. Okay. Is there a certain number of rows between each JavaScript section? Yes and no. I mean, in JavaScript, you have to make sure that you're not putting them on top of one another, and we have to make sure that each row is complete. But the main thing to be sure of is that there are opening and closing brackets. Everything is contained. So as long as, yeah, this might be easier to add visuals. To be safe, what I would do is just make sure that there's one thing between, I would keep the beginning. This is commented out. Anytime you see a line and a star, that means that this isn't actually doing anything. It's just there for the programmer as a frame of reference. I would just leave a line in between your last line of code, which should have that squiggly bracket, curly bracket rather, squiggly bracket, curly bracket. You can tell I'm not a programmer. Make sure that that's at the end. And then, yeah, just keep a line in between and you'll be fine. If you have 2 or 3, that's not going to break it. It's just if they're on top of one another, you might start to see some issues. Do you ever enter anything in the CSS section? Yes, great question, thank you. And I actually feel like I may have put in some information in here for when you need to add CSS and when not to. But generally what to remember is like CSS is kind of the layer that goes on top of JavaScript. JavaScript is going to run some of the different rules and things like that, whereas CSS is going to be more of the how do we make it pretty, if you will. So let's go ahead and look back at the form itself, and I'll show you what I'm referring to. So like when you change the color of something, that's almost always CSS. And stylizing in general too, I think. So the hide show field I put in here in the CSS class. Label color is a good example. So for the label color, that one's using, I'm actually referencing the label over here. So on the right-hand side, each one of these is given an ID. And I guess this is the other one, but it's same thing. So Q112, so the ID Q112, section header color is white, and then the background color is green. And so when you're changing colors of different areas, that's always going to be a CSS function. Also, the inline block is CSS as well because that's stylized. But I would say in general, if something doesn't work at first in the JavaScript, make sure that you have the CSS class still correct. If it still doesn't work, try dropping into the CSS area and maybe that'll do it. But in general, just know that CSS is more for stylizing and for like colors and things like that, whereas hiding, showing, and running the different rules are going to be in a JavaScript piece. By default, the JavaScript is going to be a lot longer than CSS. If it's only one line, I would try it in the CSS first, although it's not always the rule. Can you show exactly how you add those databases? You had several, or were those already on the server you pointed to? Yeah, so the exact way to do that would be forms, administration, data sources, new data source. So this is what that's going to look like. So I'm going to call this one external tables because I already have I already have LF external tables labeled incorrectly. So we'll call this one LF external tables. If you're looking at SQL, you'll use SQL. If it's something else, you'll need to make sure the drivers are installed. In this case, ODBC would be my only other option. Server is going to be important. That's going to be listed up here. So in this case, I'm using localhost, but you may need the FQDN for the actual server. If you're pointing to an external server, if you're using localhost, of course, this will work fine. And then your database. And database, of course, is going to be referring to the actual database here. In this case, I'll try external tables, although that wouldn't be a good example because there's nothing in there. But that's how that would work. And then, of course, you would need an account and password. This would probably be an SA account. Or I don't know if you can necessarily use Windows authentication here or not. So I'm not going to actually be able to connect this completely because I'm not sure what the SA password is. I usually use Windows authentication. But that's how that works. So if you have all of this information, then you should be able to do that. So once you've added the database as a data source for external tables, that will give you all those different tables to choose from. You just then need to make sure that you select that and then add and remove the business process that you want to be able to look up to that database. And I hope that answered your question. I know that was pretty quick. Will this be available for playback? Yes, this was all recorded and will be up and on our YouTube channel next week, for better or for worse. And I'm hoping, I've never actually done this, so I'm hoping there's a way to also make the Word doc with all this information available on the from the YouTube channel. if not there, then maybe we can make it available on the CDI website somewhere. But I know when I was first getting started, I was always really interested in how did you do this? I'd see other people's forms. I'd be like, wow, everything's like in a line and you mask this. How do you do that? Like, oh, you need JavaScript. I'm like, oh, I don't know JavaScript. Didn't realize you could just copy and paste. So as I've learned, I wanted to share this with as many of you guys as possible. As you can tell by the enthusiasm in my voice. And yes, thank you, Thomas. Yeah, you can use Windows account for the data source add. All good questions. All right, we've got like 3 minutes left. Any other additional questions? We actually used the whole hour today. Well, if there are no other questions, thank you guys so much for joining me today. We do one of these the second Thursday of every month. So please join us or continue to join us if you found this helpful. And like I said, this should be up and available on YouTube probably next week sometime. Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of your week.